name is Francine MacBride, and full disclosure, I am a cousin by marriage, right?
Yes.
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
But more importantly, Michael's a good friend of mine, and I really, I have followed his journey as a writer and was really excited when he asked if I would kind of lead this conversation. So without further ado, first, what an awesome setting. This is just such a jewel for Saline and for the surrounding area where, at a time when bookstores are just, they're dropping, by the dozens, and people are going to more of an electronic medium. So having this in Saline is quite a resource. So thank you for having us. And of course, you all know Michael, but I'd like to just give you a little bit of a formal introduction. So for folks who may be listening to this later on and are interested in more books, you can put it on your website or do whatever you like.
Podcast. Everyone
your
has
podcast. I'd love to have a podcast. So it's my pleasure to lead you through this conversation this evening with Michael David MacBride. Michael was originally from Saline and now calls Minnesota his home. So welcome and thank you so much. So Michael has done a lot of things throughout his career, and I think a lot of those experiences have shaped individual books, and there's a collective through line through many of his books that you find in whether you were a newspaper delivery professional, he's worked at a bank, worked collections at a bank, you were a roadie, a grant writer, and got your PhD. So we're actually talking to Dr. Michael MacBride. I should have said that. And now is continuing to do outside work, but writing is a passion and something that you have really taken off on.
Definitely.
A number of books. Some of them are here on the shelves behind us. All of them are available on Amazon.
And here as well.
And here,
sure,
Bidding Wars, Lies from Beechwood Drive, which I loved. The Life and Times of, there we go, Scarborough Fair.
Yeah.
That just jumped out. That's about ska music, which was really cool because I didn't know anything about ska music until I read that. The Great Clavette, of course, and a young reader series called The Thompson Twins, which you co-wrote with Heidi Wall-Burns. Very cool series.
Thank you.
So before we jump in to At the Wake, which is why we're here this evening, I want to talk a little bit about your writing process and how do you take an idea or an experience and turn it into a story?
First of all, thank you everyone. I really appreciate it. And you mentioned what a jewel fine print is, and I tell Bill and Lindsay every time I come here that this used to be like a dime store. And David, you probably remember what the name of it is. I don't. But I used to come here and they had cheap plastic toys and fabrics, and then they had a spinner rack up front that had romance novels and the same 6 comic books that never advanced beyond the month that they had there. And so this is like actually having books outside of the library is phenomenal, and I love that. But I see them as like puzzles, and a lot of times with writing, I kind of collect experiences, through doing weird jobs and saying yes to more things than I probably should say yes to. But there's almost always a good story in saying yes to something. And so I think of them a lot of times as little scenes. And so like I collect this scene, and I think about like what happened before that and what happened after that, and is this character interesting enough that has something. And a lot of times I'll write little scenes. I could tell a longer version, but there's a ridiculous scene that appears in one of the books that I'm working on now, which my mom was present for, which was I was buying a car, and this poor salesman in the midst of haggling shot a booger across the desk at me. And then tried to scrape it back towards him, and it like kept rumpling, like the it was one of those big like desk calendars, and it would like bunch up, and then the burger would come back closer to me, and he was like, "I'm sorry." Anyway, so like that, I'm like, okay, what happened to that guy after we bought this car and left? And so like, that's often how it starts, is something like that.
So a character that you've encountered may find their way into a book. You've all been warned. might not be the book you're working on today, but someday this may become part of a book.
And they're usually like, you mash them together. I know, like with Lives from Beechwood Drive, it's about a small town gossip who runs around the neighborhood, and people who lived here probably could think of some people who that maps onto. But in truth, I took a lot of the mothers I knew, and kind of that one character imbibes a lot of their traits.
Yeah.
So it's never just one person. It's an amalgamation or something like that. So,
very cool. Very cool. Well, let's dig in. I'm going to try really hard not to give away any spoilers tonight. If Michael wants to, he can. So this book takes place in a small town, very similar to Saline, in Michigan, and it's an intergenerational story that involves a murder. And the villain in the story is a pretty rough but really complicated character. Really a lot of character development there. And I found myself as a reader having empathy for this character. And all of his faults, I connected with empathy with this person. And so for me, again, that's how I felt. Is it a challenge? What is the challenge as a writer do you want characters who are deeply, deeply broken and flawed? Do you want the reader to have empathy for them? What is that point at which you create the tension and pull them back and forth between empathy and anger toward these characters?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I mean, there are bad people in the world, and they inhabit books and things like that. And it is a reality that somebody will be focused. And so, but it's no fun to read somebody who's black and white, I think. If they're all bad, nobody is going to find that very compelling or interesting. I think reading is a lot of, I can't remember what the teacher was that told me this, but they said that like reading is an empathy machine. Mm-hmm. You learn by being forced into the perspective of some other character that is unlike you.
Yeah.
And who better to kind of experience a unique set of circumstances through than somebody hopefully that you will never emulate.
Yeah.
And kind of see that. But with Achiel, the character in here, he is he's done terrible things, but just like anybody else, he's also a father, and
mm-hmm.
depending on your relationship to that character, you have a different view of them. And I feel like it's realism, mm-hmm. To have somebody that's well-rounded, that's more complicated. And I think as a reader, it's more compelling to read somebody that's interesting, that challenges maybe some of the the mm-hmm. ideas you might have of them up front. So.
Yeah. And so in this book, there are multiple perspectives and points of view and individuals who have a different kind of relationship with this person throughout the entire book. So that was really a very interesting way to present this, because you can see one person really has empathy for him, other people are very dismissive and angry. So it was really a very cool way to present the information.
And I'll be honest, I don't really like writing in first person, but I didn't know how to accomplish this kind of trick without doing that.
Yeah.
So
very cool.
I'm glad it worked.
Yeah. So this is a book about family dysfunction and secrets that are kept that continue to fuel this dysfunction. I saw a quote recently that said, "Unresolved ghosts just grow stronger across generations, destroying children with the very things that their parents swore to save them from." What do you think about that in the context of this book?
I like that quote. I mean, I think it's true. I mean, generationally, I think we treated, trauma. And now, like, generational trauma is this thing, or family trauma. We talk about those things. And for a long time, secrets got hidden and buried, and we didn't talk about the ghosts or the skeletons in our closet. And in fact, that was often the thing that would happen, right? Is if you had secrets on somebody, it was almost this weird leverage or power you had over them. And I think it's very healthy to talk about those things, and having those complicated conversations with people, with children, whatever, lessens that burden. It's the more you hold those things in, it just it's a weight to carry. And so I think unpacking that and sharing those stories, not only does it hopefully prevent the cycle of abuse and all kinds of things that get buried, but it's also an opportunity to realize that people aren't unique or alone in this endeavor. So often we just don't talk about things that make us uncomfortable, but then the very thing that will help is if somebody else is going through something similar. But if neither of you talk about it, then there's no opportunity for that. Yeah. I like the trend towards being honest and forthright and telling stories.
Yeah. And you can see that through the book, and we'll talk a little bit about how that goes through the generations into the end of the book, where you really sort of deal with it as a generational issue. So
Sure.
we'll get to that in a minute. I want to talk about Lucas. So Lucas is the oldest son, and he's the one who the dad primarily takes his anger out on, physically, verbally abusing him, implicating him in several crimes, and even tries at one point to get the son to take the blame for this murder that was committed. Nobody would blame Lucas if he turned his back on his dad, or he found peace when he was incarcerated and in his subsequent death. But that doesn't seem to be the case. So talk to us about this complex character that Lucas represents. He's both a victim but an advocate.
Yeah, I was thinking about, there are all kinds of situations where there's that disconnect between the parent and the child, and whether it's a disagreement over a curfew, or something relatively insignificant, or something like this where you literally have been indoctrinated to crime in a way like that, and then suffered emotional or physical abuse. I think there's still that tug, like on some level they are still your parent, and as complicated as that is, I think you have good memories, and it's that competition, I think, in your brain that watch any TV show that deals with an alcoholic father or something, right? Like you don't know which dad you get in that moment.
Right.
Are you going to get the fun dad who wants to take you out and do fun things, and or are you going to get the one that is irrationally rageful?
Right.
And there's always, I think as a kid, there's always hope, like it'll be the fun one this time.
Yeah. So. And you're presenting yourself into those situations as you're just you. And so how does, you're not the fun kid, you're not the angry kid in that situation, you're just you. And so how you deal with that.
And you're stuck too. As a child, you don't have the luxury of going, well, I'm just going to move away, or
right.
at a certain point you can, obviously. And so there's also just that forced reality of like, I need to appease them on some level,
right?
The joke is, or the comment is always, like my house, you're my way or the highway, right? And like literally, sometimes it's not the option that you can take. So,
right. Did you have?
Yeah, I brought the section on Lucas, so I'll read a. I kind of chopped it down a little bit, because one of the things I find with reading is, reading it on the page is a little different than reading it out loud, and so I tried to cut some of the, I guess the editors would call it fat. I call it texture. So, but this comes from the very first section. So what happens is the book is broken up into different sections. The first section is at the wake. We're literally at Achiel's wake, and people are telling stories, and then each of the other sections are other places people gather and tell stories. So it's like in the car, on the phone, in letters, and so on. But this is Lucas's perspective, and this one goes: I helped cut down the trees. What 10-year-old boy would turn down a chance to use a chainsaw? I never was his favorite. I got mom's olive skin, and who knows where I got this curly hair from, which definitely didn't help. Plus, mom had put up a stink about wanting to name me Lucas after her mom. She, as far as I know, never really fought for anything. Suddenly wanted to name her first son after her family and not after her husband. It must have surprised Dad, because he didn't argue. Then again, maybe I didn't look enough like a Van Slyck for him to put up a fight about having a namesake of his own. It's almost funny to think about it now, but I remember one of those times that he was beating me. He kept saying how mom had an affair with a black guy, and that's where I came from. The idea of mom having an affair was ridiculous, but the claim was even more ridiculous coming from Dad, who himself actually had affairs. It's weird. You'd think I would have hated him, but all I ever wanted to was to make him proud. I crawled under cars with him when he went to change the oil. I learned how to weld by watching him. When he opened his mouth, I listened. So when he told me his idea for revenge and mentioned I could use a chainsaw, of course I said yes. This is going to take a little time to do right, he said. He called Harper that night, and Mr. Harper came over to apologize. The way Dad was yelling at him, I thought Dad was going to kill him on the spot. Eventually, they quieted down and talked normal, and Mr. Harper went back home, and Dad walked in the living room and saw me sitting on the couch. He nodded at me and kept going down the hall. Honestly, I'd kind of forgotten about the whole thing by the time Dad finally came in and told me it was time. For what? I asked, and he shook his head. I followed him and decided I'd figure out as we went. We went to the barn, and he handed me these big leather gloves. Put them on, he said. I did. Then he pulled down the chainsaws and we loaded them along with gas tanks into the back of the truck. It took 2 days to cut down all the trees. By the time I cut through my 3rd tree, I was ready to be done, but I knew Dad didn't want to hear about my hands ache or how my arms were tired, so I just kept going. We started close to the house first, and as the day went on, we worked our way out toward the road. You think a neighbor would have seen us as they drove by, but if they did, no one said anything. I didn't see anyone either, but then again, I was trying not to get crushed by falling trees. And Dad, like everything, didn't care. He had the attitude of a man who is supposed to be there cutting down trees. He just acted as normal as possible. When we were done, it was like one of those pictures out of a history book where the lumberjacks are all standing around and the trees are felled everywhere in the now desolate landscape. If this were any other dad, we wouldn't have done this thing in the first place. But he would have thanked me for all my hard work and maybe rewarded me with my first beer or something. But Dad wasn't one for sentimentality. We went back to the house, put the chainsaws and the gas tanks away, hung up the leather gloves, and went outside. I kept waiting for him to say something, but he didn't. Instead, he went into the bathroom and flossed his teeth. He flossed his teeth after every meal. He was obsessive about it. He always said that flossing was more important than brushing. Do you think we had time to brush our teeth in Korea, he would ask. Hell no, but I flossed every chance I got. And look at my teeth. He said the same thing about Vietnam. There were times where I swear he would go days without brushing even after he got home, but he never skipped flossing. I wasn't there when Mr. Harper finally came home from camping and knocked on the door, but Sophie was, and it was one of her favorite stories. The short version is that he came, knocked on the screen door, Dad walked by and laughed, then left him standing on the porch for a while. The way Sophie tells it, she could almost see the gears in Harper's mind turning, trying to decide what to do. After the trees, I helped with most of Dad's errands. Even if I had wanted to say no, it wasn't like I really could. We killed people's cats and dogs, dug up yards, burned things down, gutted deer and left the guts around people's porches. Not proud of it, but at the same time, it was the only way to be with Dad when he wasn't angry or beating me. He loved the hell out of Sophie, but he never asked her to do any of those things. Dad thought of Sophie as anything other than a girl, and even if he thought I was some kind of bastard freak, at least I was a man and supposed to do that kind of thing. Maybe he wanted to protect Sophie and didn't care if I was caught and arrested. We never were, but it's something I hadn't thought about before saying it just now. It might have been that he didn't want Sophie to end up like me, and in that sense it worked. She turned out all right. Things could have gone better for me, but they could have been a lot worse too.
Yeah. And so that's sort of the through line. Lucas is setting it up from the very beginning that this was a really tough upbringing with a really complicated father, and yet he loves him.
Yeah.
There's that tension in the relationship between, I'm sure, people on the outside the family, where how can you continue to love this person? So it's really, and the character continues through the book. Again, don't want to give any spoilers away, but continues that loyalty to his dad, despite all evidence that he should or shouldn't. There's a chapter called Coded Language, and I really like this chapter as it reminded me of the role that family secrets play in their lives and in the dysfunction, and how it rolls down from generation to generation. So the use of coded language as a way to distance themselves from a situation or dehumanize or depersonalize an individual in your life. I found a little excerpt that I'll read, and this is when they're having a conversation with the grandmother about her husband. For her, it wasn't about using a coded language out of embarrassment. It was more that she did not spend much time in that part of the past, and thought of it all in vague terms that Anton came to assume she used to soften the blows of the bad memories. It was easier for her to let those memories fade because they were no longer part of her life. And by the time Anton began asking, that time hadn't been part of her life for many decades. So talk to us a little bit about the use of this coded language, not using his name, referring to him as he, and the situation, and murder. Talk to us a little bit about that.
So that chapter almost wasn't in the book. Like I wrote it and I really liked it and I felt like it was important, but I was afraid that, I don't know, sometimes like you read a book and there's like a chapter that like feels like it's talking to the reader and is like, here's some information you need to have. And I was afraid it was that. Mm-hmm. And so like it was cut out at one point, it was put back in, it was cut out, put back in again. And ultimately I decided I liked it more. And I kept reworking it a little bit here and there. But I think when you have one of these family secrets, you have to figure out, like, there's this hole in your story at some point. And somebody is going to identify that. And so you have to figure out how you talk about that. And I don't know that families get around and talk about, like, well, this is what we're going to say, but you kind of follow the lead of the older generations, I think. And so there's an instance of statutory rape in the book, and she is never named by the family. It is the girl. It is this thing that happens kind of off camera that people don't talk about. But when it comes up, there's a way of addressing it. And so, like talking about this person who had this massive impact on the family, still part of the family. And, somebody might ask you, like, where's your grandfather? And, well, it's easier to not use the name in a way. And by not filling in those gaps, I think it does depersonalize, but it also maybe makes it less real. What's the joke or the comment about, like, naming the devil is like the way to call them out or whatever. But like, if you don't name them, then they're always in the shadows. So
I was glad you put that in there, because I thought it was a really really interesting, because throughout the book, and you bring up the sexual assault. So there is a lot of coded language around this young woman. She's a 14-year-old girl, and she is sexually assaulted by the main character. And we only know that because we know at one point that he served a year in prison for this event. But the way the language is used among the family is that he had an affair. And we all know that 14-year-olds don't have affairs with 40-year-olds. But there's some victim blaming.
For sure.
And again, nobody really wants to talk about it. And it isn't until the chapter, the Gen X and Y chapter, where they're at another wake. And so the grandchildren, who are now teenagers, are having a conversation about their grandfather and what they knew and what they didn't know. And one of the young cousins says, what about the girl? She really seemed, she's like, why don't we talk about her? What happened with her? How did this happen? Clearly it wasn't an affair. And so I'm sure everything about a writer is intentional, but what was the intent around, the thought process around giving that responsibility to this third generation, to this young person who finally says, what about the girl?
Yeah, I think, one is time and distance, for sure. Like, you get enough time from a thing, especially if it's been hidden or not talked about, somebody starts asking questions to kind of unravel those things. And I think, kind of to the coded language point, you follow the lead of the older generation. The older generation called it an affair. So that's how people spoke about it. Yeah. And it's not until you get to Gen X, Gen Y, who, get bad raps, I suppose, by the media or whatever, but like, they're more introspective in a way, I think, or more willing to talk about some of the things. They're kind of that crack. And I think millennials and Gen Zs and other people, continue to kind of chip away at those things as well. To talk about things that make people uncomfortable, but to ask those questions out of curiosity and, what happened to that person? Yeah. And, it doesn't really give much away, but Miriam is the girl's name, and she gets a chapter of her own. And even she doesn't talk about what happened to her. What she talks about is what happens to her father. And she has a daughter of her own, and it never comes up, she doesn't talk about that. So I think, the victim also has that code or that protection, that it's hard to talk about those things. Yeah. And yet it would probably offer some level of relief to share that experience with somebody that cares and is willing to listen.
Yeah. I will say, for all the bad rap that these younger generations get, that is the one thing that that ability to just kind of say the things that maybe we all were thinking or saying or wanted to say in these complicated family dynamics. So I really appreciated that you gave that role to this person to really kind of call it out. So it was really really cool. Let's talk about Anton. So Anton is a grandson and seems to have the courage to face the flames of this generational trauma trauma that's been running through the family. So tell us a little bit about his character. Who is he? What role does he serve? And what is his motivation to take on the role that he has in the book?
Sure. So, I mean, he's definitely a Gen Xer person, and very interested in stories. And, I'll be honest, like in a lot of ways, this is kind of modeled after me. I mean, the MacBride side of the family, I'm fascinated by the stories and collecting things and like, what happened and who are the Tremaines and why aren't they at our reunions? Like I ask questions that people don't ask for whatever reason. And I think every family kind of has one of those people who just all of a sudden ask the question, like you said, that nobody thought to ask or knew they'd be willing to have a conversation about. And so Anton kind of fills that purpose. They ask questions, they dig, they know how to. I love research. I mean, so like one of the things I do, super nerdy, is I go to archives and I dig in the archives and I just find stories that interest me and whatever. And so like in this case, the Anton character goes to the courthouse and like reads the court transcripts because he's afraid that the family doesn't want to talk about this thing, but he knows like there's a public record someplace. So like you can literally go to courthouses and find the transcripts and read through these things. And it's super interesting. And I read plenty of court transcripts to do that because there is a section where you actually get like the judge and all that stuff. And that's based on things I found. So because I'm not a lawyer by any means. So but yeah, the Anton character, that's really his motivation, is like he's just curious. And he's kind of the story collector. And I think maybe, I think of the older generations of any of my families, the older they get, I think the less precious they are about these things that maybe used to matter at one point, and the more willing to have those conversations. So it's kind of like a matter of like, how old is the oldest generations who have the information, and how willing is somebody in a younger generation to ask those questions. And you just kind of get the right moment. So I brought the little section on Anton that I'll read really quick. So so this comes from a section of In the Cars. And so in this situation, Anton and his two siblings are stuck in traffic. And so this is his part. Grandpa, what about him? Oh, Grandpa Van Slyck? Yeah, sure. I had to figure it out on my own, but after I knew the basics, then they started to tell me stories. I mean, I was told the same stuff you guys were, at least I assume so. Grandpa did something bad and was in prison. I don't think that Mom and her brothers were trying to hide it from us. I'm sure it was hard for them and probably painful to go through it again. I can only imagine what it was like trying to live a normal life after that. In a small town, that stuff spreads quickly and people have long memories for stories like that. Plus, when someone asks you, tell me about yourself, like in an interview on a date, it's hard to see yourself objectively enough to be able to answer, and harder to know what they're looking for, or at least the basic idea of what they want to talk about. So I remember asking Mom, tell me about Grandpa, and she did, but I wasn't asking the right questions. And I would add also maybe not at the right time, but it's hard to ask the right questions when you don't have the information to begin with. Anyway, let's see. I heard Mom and Uncle Lucas talking about Grandpa and what they were going to do when he got out, and that caught my attention. I wasn't exactly eavesdropping on them because they knew I was there, but I just made it look like I was more engrossed in a book than I really was. They were talking quietly, so I didn't catch it all, but the gist was that he was up for parole in 2002, and they were starting to freak out. Lucas made it very clear that he was nervous because of what had happened during the trial, and Mom didn't do anything to ease his concerns. They both agreed. Uncle Ronnie didn't have anything to worry about, but Lucas had reason to be nervous, and Mom didn't know where she stood in the whole thing. But that was what I heard that day. But hearing them talk about the trial made me realize I should go to a court and find the transcripts from the trial. So I did. I do have this memory of sitting on his knee and him bouncing me there and doing the horsey ride thing. He really did have a nice smile when he actually smiled. The problem is, I'm not sure if I actually remember that, or if I've just seen a photograph. I feel like it's a real memory, but it's one of the few photos of him and me together, and so I don't know how many times I've looked at that photo. Have you seen it? Oh, you should go through Mom's old photo albums. There's some interesting stuff in there, and some hilarious photos of her and her dad. That photo of me on Grandpa's knee is in there, Grandpa's smiling, and I'm clearly enjoying myself, but if you look over my shoulder, you can see Mom, and she looks concerned. She's not having a good time. Knowing what she knew about her father, I can't say as though I blame her for being nervous. Grandma Grandma and Mom always said he was very good with children, I guess, and I guess I was just at the right age because he seemed to be having fun with me. He killed Mr. Ellis in 75. I'd love to ask him about the whole thing, to hear it from him, but I'm terrified of the idea of speaking to him. Actually going to prison, I think Mom would deeply disapprove. Plus, she was always always said how manipulative he was. She used to get him to she says he used to get them to do all kinds of crazy, and even from prison, and manipulated them over the phone. I mean, just look at how Ronnie and Lucas don't get along even today. You didn't know that? Yeah, it's not like Ronnie is Team Achiel or anything, but he and Lucas definitely don't see eye to eye on the whole thing. Well, it's because Lucas told the truth in the trial, and Ronnie lied. Look, Ronnie was 10, and he had to testify because he was there when Grandpa killed Mr. Ellis. Grandpa told both boys to lie. Ronnie did what his dad told him to. When he got up on stand, he promised to tell the truth, and then he gave the court version of the truth that Grandpa had fed him. It was an accident. Mr. Ellis had a knife. Grandpa tried to talk him down, but Mr. Ellis grabbed Grandpa's gun, and it went off. He fell back into the seat of his car. When Lucas got up on the stand, and he was 21, not 10, he started to tell the same story as Ronnie, but then he started to cry. And the attorney asked him, "What's wrong?" And then Lucas told the court the whole truth, exactly what had happened. How Mr. Ellis came over to the property and started yelling at Grandpa. He didn't have a knife, and he didn't start to get out of the car, and he didn't grab Grandpa's gun. Mr. Ellis was just in the car, probably drunk, calling Grandpa names and accusing him of ruining his daughter's life, which, honestly, I mean, clearly Grandpa was guilty of contributing to that. Though, really, I'm not sure what happened to the girl. Maybe she turned out all right, but I can imagine how something like that would mess you up for a while. Anyway, the attorney asked Lucas why his story differed from his brother's account, and Lucas came completely clean, because he told us to lie. He told us to tell that version of the story, Lucas said. And the attorney replied, "And Mr. Van Slyck, why should the court believe you? Isn't it true that you and your father don't exactly get along?" And Lucas said, "Right, he doesn't like me, but I'm telling you the truth." Then, if there was any doubt about whether Lucas was telling the truth or not, Grandpa shouted, again, this is actually in the court transcripts, I can show you my printouts if you want, "When I get out, I'm gonna kill you," which probably isn't the best thing to say in court.
And that's from Lucas. And he's the one that, again, through this through line, the book continues to seek his dad's approval and his love, despite having his life threatened. I really felt for him.
Yeah, it's got to be a difficult position to be in. Yeah. And, I think about all the incarcerated people and their families that are living without them. I mean, it's a reality that they have to come to grips with at some point, for sure.
Yeah, it was great. For readers, characters often live beyond the pages of the books. They live in our hearts, they live in our minds, and we want to know how they're doing and how they coped. And for me, I always hope, and in particular with this book, that the characters were able to find some healing, to find some redemption and forgiveness for themselves, for their father, for whatever the situation was that caused them then to continue on for generations to tell the story or to retell the story in a way that serves their heart. Do the characters in this book ever experience, as their creator, do they get a chance to really experience some healing?
I think so. I mean, there's definitely, I don't know, forgiveness is hard, but acceptance or, acknowledgement, I suppose, is sometimes something that you can shoot for. And, I think one of there are lots of moments, I think, where you get some sense of reconciliation or an idea that, like, they've come to terms with things. So Ruby is one of the daughters, and she definitely gets this moment with her mom that I like a lot in the story. I don't know that, the one character who doesn't get a lot of opportunity for that through the story is Achiel, which I can't remember if you were going to ask me about the epilogue or not, but at the very end, there's an epilogue where you get a chance to see something with that. So, I think it's real that, like, you come to terms with things, whether you accept it or forgive people, and you move on one way or another. So,
and it's a complicated story because it isn't just about a group of people and a particular villain. They all have these really complicated relationships in their family units. And Ruby in particular, having a little bit of redemption and a connection there was really special. So the epilogue. So again, I'm not going to give any spoilers away. But why did you choose the ending that you chose?
So in between the sections, there are almost everything is first person, and then in between each of the sections, Contradictions, there's this little third person account that's kind of like a prologue or something. I don't know. It felt necessary to kind of give an objective thing periodically. And as a reader, I find first person kind of exhausting to read. So like I wanted to reprieve myself. So I built these in there. And then what I realized is I wanted an objective perspective on what really happened, because you have so many competing stories throughout the book that I wanted truth. And as an actual person, you don't get that a lot of times. You know, you have so many different accounts of what happened or who saw what, and you have to piece it together in your head. But the great thing about fiction is I can just go like, there's the truth. Like, you know, I can point the camera where I want it to. And so that's what I did in the epilogue without giving too much away. And like my hope was to continue to kind of complicate stuff and then leave the reader with having to come to terms with, I read all these things, I read this, how do I feel about what happens?
No, that was exactly how I felt, was sort of like, oh yeah. So it was really cool. And somebody who usually reads the book endings first, I have a real problem with that. I have had to tear chapters of books and hide them places because I like to go to the end to see how it turned out. So it was everything I had, and I was glad that I resisted with this book.
My grandma June would always read the end also. She read mysteries
terrible.
Too. Yeah.
Yes, terrible. I flipped through to see if a character, I just look, see is their name still there. Okay, so they're still in play. It's really bad. It's really bad. So let's go back to the original question, sort of an epilogue for the evening. You talked a little bit about the writing process, but what is an ending of a book process like for you? How do you know when it's done? I know that when I've written anything, I go, you know, after you've either submitted it, you're like, oh, I should have included this, or I want to go back and explore that character a little bit more, but like it's in print. So what does that end of that process look like for you?
It's hard. I mean, you because you can always perpetually tweak, you know, and finesse things. And for me, in this book, honestly, I started writing versions of this in like mid 90s. So like it's lived with me for a very long time, and it never felt right. Like, I mean, it's this stupid thing where you kind of get like this gut check of like, that feels good. And, you know, there were some pieces that didn't until they kind of fell into place. Like the coded language chapter was when I wrestled with a bunch. The Gen X, Gen Y one was kind of a later addition, but I felt like I needed that. But it wouldn't have occurred to me in the 90s. You know, if that book had come out then, it would have lacked that chapter because I wouldn't have had the life experience or whatever to get to that. And so, you know, I had the luxury in this case because I was living life and doing other things and writing just kind of on the side. So, but I don't know, COVID changed lots of things, and that was kind of my motivation to finish things that I had started. And so that was really when I turned back to it again and started working on things. And I got to the point where I felt like if I played with it too much, I was going to mess it up. So I was like, I think it's good. Like there's some spots that I would probably, honestly, like going through here, I was like, cutting stuff out. It's like, why am I leaving this in if I'm cutting it when I'm reading it? Like, you can continue to mess with it. And I know people who adapt their books or get to do things with TV series and movies talk about that luxury of like having one more chance to, you know, edit. Like, okay, great. I lived with that book for 5 years and now it's coming to the big screen. Like, awesome. Now I can go through and I can cut the characters that I've learned over the last 5 years that don't matter. Or
you can give them additional dimension.
Yes, right. Yeah, like the guy who wrote Silo and all those books that got turned into the Apple series, he's instrumental in writing the scripts for him. So he's been able to go through and being like, I wish the storyline went that way. This one should have been bigger, and manipulate those things. So I think you never stop tinkering if you get the chance. And at some point you just have to go like, oh, I'm ready for something else.
It's got to be done. That's a nice thing about college. If you've written any papers, it's got to be done by the end of the semester, whether you want it to end or not, it's done. So but I could see how it would be very hard, you know, and I think of writing as a form of artistic expression. And so if you're a painter or a ceramist, you just want one more brush stroke, and at some point you have to be done and let it live the way it is. So
and for this book, like really, like often I have kind of a vision in mind with a story, and with Bidding Wars, like it was very briefly, it was the science fiction, takes place in this alternative future where children's futures are exchanged on the market, on the stock market. And so the vision I had was tickers across the eyes of children, and I just like that ends up being the cover. For this one, like the vision I kind of had for it was like this traumatic event, and I just thought of it as like a rock being thrown in a pond, and then like the ripples are strongest near the generation that's right around it, and as it goes out, like that was the story I wanted to tell, was like how that impacts each of those people further out from that initial moment. So
very cool.
So I felt like I got there.
All of your books are so unique. They all have, there's science fiction, they're just really interesting, different. So I think, so as a writer, do you think, okay, I want to write a nonfiction book, or this is going to be a science fiction book, or how do you, because you write in different genres?
Honestly, it just kind of depends on, what competes in my interest, the thing that feels most pressing, in the moment. So, this was the story that had lived with me really for the longest time, and I wanted to finish it. So it's like, okay, this one. And then The Car Salesman is one that I started like a year and a half ago, and is kind of like stopped at about 60,000 words because I start working on other things, So like, I'll get back around to finishing that one at some point.
Great. Well, before we wrap up this evening, any spoilers of books that are coming out? What have you got? What's next in the collection?
So I talked about The Car Salesman book. That is probably another year or two. Right now, nonfiction really has my attention. I like writing nonfiction. It gives me an excuse to research, which I love. I just love digging in. Weirdly, right before I left, I find these holes in history and like people's stories that haven't been told. So like Clavette is this magician, painter, whatever. He was super popular at a certain time, but then he just kind of disappeared, and I was like, it's weird, nobody's written about him. So I've kind of found a collection of cartoonists from the 60s that wrote comics, and nobody has written about them for whatever reason, and I've kind of taken it upon myself to find them. And so they all wrote under pseudonyms, which makes it a challenge, which I enjoy. But I've gone through and I've identified 15, and my goal is like short biographies with their work, kind of a coffee table book kind of thing, to get a chance to tell their stories and to showcase what they did. Cool. And because I dream big, I pitched it to South by Southwest, which is a music and film festival in Texas, which I've always wanted to go to. And so now I'm just waiting to see if they accept it.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much.
Thank
everybody for coming out, and our host for this evening, Fine Print Bookshop. So Michael, you're going to be in the back signing some copies.
We'll sell books and sign, and I'll talk, and there are lots of snacks. My mom brought homemade cookies. Kerrigan's has some delicious danishes and pastries. There's lavender lemonade. There's some wine. Help yourself to anything. And obviously, shop the store. There's lots of other fun stuff here. So
great.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.